Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining me at Black Hat Asia. It is somewhat different to previous years, isn't it? I still, fortunately, have many fond memories of attending conferences in person, but frankly, many new fond memories of running events like this and still being able to interact with people online. And one thing that definitely hasn't changed pre and post current COVID is data breaches. And I have been spending a lot of time, both over the last year and a bit and for many years before that, thinking about data breaches. And what I thought I'd try and share with everyone today is just some of the things that I've been seeing in the industry, particularly with the last 11 billion or so records worth of breach data that I've been dealing with. And of course, when I talk about data breaches, I'm largely talking about have I been pwned. And this is a fun little project. Can I still say fun? Can I still say little? This is still a pet project, which is intended to index data breaches and make them searchable by people. And I'm always a little bit cautious when I set an expectation for a talk around a title like 11 billion breached records, because for all I know, between the time I propose 11 billion and the time I actually do the talk, it's now 12 billion or something like that. But it has stuck at 11 point something billion since I proposed the talk and then finally join you here today. And it's across many, many hundreds of individual data breaches. And of course, there is pretty much an endless flow of data that comes into have I been pwned. And I didn't really expect that when I began the project. In fact, when I began the project, it started out very small. It started out back in 2013 with this launch tweet. And I tweeted this and I thought, this will be fun. Some of my mates will use this. They'll go to have I been pwned, they'll plug their email address in, they'll get some results. This will keep me entertained for a little while. Not everyone was convinced. There were a few suspicious people out there. What if I was just harvesting addresses? Now, when I started Have I Been Pwned, I started with about 155 million records. So even back then, and of course that's very, very small by today's standards, but even back then, I was thinking I don't need to harvest your email addresses. I've got 155 million of them already if I was to be a nefarious person and do something nasty with them, which of course I'm not, and I haven't, nor do I intend to. But I understand the suspicion. People were like, so I just go to your site and plug in my email address and I trust you with it? I always thought that was a funny premise to make because I'm like, well, you trusted Adobe with it, now here we are. But I get the suspicion. And what I've found particularly fascinating over the last, what are we at now, 7 and a bit years, is just the way this thing has grown and the places it's taken me. Because again, like this is a pet project. It's something I did for fun, for community goodwill. You know, some people find it useful. But it's taken me to some very unexpected places. And I think probably the real sort of penny drop moment for me was when I ended up here in Congress in the US, in Washington, D.C. And in fact, when I got asked to go to Congress, I said to him, it's like, you know I'm Australian, right? Like, are you sure you want me to go to the other side of the world and testify about the impact of data breaches on knowledge-based authentication? And they're like, yeah, no, it'll be cool. You should come. And I was excited, but I was worried too because I didn't have any clothes. I mean, this is me, right? This is normal. In fact, I'm in Australia now, which means I'm dressed in board shorts. I've already revealed more than people expected to in this talk. But this is normal, right? Like I go here and then I go down and I get in the water and I do my normal Australia Gold Coasty things. So everything you see in this picture, I had to go and buy in terms of clothing. Like I had to buy the suit, the shirt, the tie, everything. But you might be gathering also, like I don't like to take things too seriously. Like this has got to be a little bit of fun as well. So I put out a tweet and I said, look, has anyone got some socks? Anyone got some cool socks that I can wear to Congress? And Sophos sent me some over. I'm wearing the socks in this picture, and I think you'd all agree I'm the best equipped socks in the photo here alongside my fellow expert witnesses who are testifying. And these socks, if we take a closer look at them, look like this. We've got Bearded Coder Dude here. For those about to code, we salute you. And I thought, oh, this will be a bit of a laugh, bit of fun. And I think sort of the best illustration of like just how far Have I Been Pwned's gone and how weird things got is not only was I there in Congress wearing free socks from Sophos, but there are photographers everywhere taking pictures. And you can now buy a stock photo of my socks for $199. Now, if you're seeing this and you would like to have a photo of my socks, get in touch. I'll give you a free one. The next time I wear socks, which is not that often. And it keeps going to these lofty heights. And I've told this story before, but here's another story I've not told until today because this is only brand new as of last week. The FBI is now sending data for Have I Been Pwned. How weird is that? Not just the FBI, but the Dutch National High Technical Crimes Unit. They're in HTCU. And even the German Federal Criminal Police Office, their BKA, is sending data to Have I Been Pwned. In this case, it came from the Emotet botnet, sending data so that it is searchable by other people. Because somehow this service became useful enough that law enforcement agencies with acronyms and logos like this are willing to send this information in. Now, this is fantastic because we can do positive things with data after bad things happen. In fact, this has always been the motto of Have I Been Pwned. It's like, let's do good things after bad things happen. Now, of course, when we talk about bad things, we are talking about hackers. And I think it's very important that we take a moment to reflect on who these hackers are. Who is the adversary that we need to concern ourselves with? And I want to familiarize ourselves a little bit with the hackers. So I went and did a Google search and I found some. Now, this is probably very familiar imagery to everybody. We see this all over the press. We see it all over security company brochures. And it tells us many interesting things about hackers. Number one, they like hoodies. Now, I'm sure everybody is aware of this already. We have seen the behoodied hacker many times before. Number two, they like green. You'll see this is a recurring theme. It's like over and over again. There's a hacker thing. There's a green screen there. They like binary too, very into the binary, the hackers. And I think what is fascinating about this is that the imagery here is chosen to create an emotion. It is chosen to make people fearful. Because it's all scary, right? Look at it. It's all dark themes and things like this. You can't quite see their face. It's hidden in the shadows of the hood. This plays into the hand of the media because everything the media puts out there is scary. When was the last time you went and opened the front page of the newspaper and it was happy? Particularly lately. Like the scary things that sell news. It's also scary things that sell security things. And you see, as I mentioned before, many companies selling their security things based on imagery like this. Now, I saw a really good example of this a few years ago, and this to me just absolutely nails the way the industry represents cybersecurity versus the reality. Now, brace yourself for this. It's hilarious. So there is a product which was put out there as a little Kickstarter from memory, a little product called Cujo. Now, you put the Cujo in your home, no more hackers. It's like magic. And they've got a video which explains how it works. And I've got a very, very short clip of the video here. I want you to watch this and listen very carefully to what's going on.
You may not know it, but you've probably already been hacked. Thousands of hacking attacks occur each day.
You may not know it, but you've probably already been hacked. It is scary, isn't it? Now, we know he's a hacker because he's got a hoodie, so yeah, check. He's also got a green screen, check. So everything here is so far ticking all the boxes of hacker-like behavior. We are appropriately scared. Except when I watched this video for the first time, and as the camera panned across his screen and I looked at it closely, I'm like, there's a browser. Like, why is he in a browser with a green screen hacking? What is this magic? I have to work this out. And I did work it out, and it is epic. Now, here's how it works. I'm going to demo this in real time. What you do is you grab yourself a browser, and you go to hackertyper.net. This still works today. You can amaze your friends and families with this. Now, once you get to hackertyper.net, all you do is you just bash the keyboard and it literally hacks for you. You can do it with one hand. Look at this. It's amazing. And this is exactly what is in the video. I went all CSI on it. I went and zoomed and enhanced, and I pulled out the text that was in that video, and it is from hackertyper.net. So you've got a company here trying to sell a security thing based on a guy in a hoodie on hackertyper.net bashing the keyboard. So see how the imagery of hackers and breaches is very, very carefully presented to create this emotion in people, and in reality, it's very, very far from the truth. Let me give you an example of how far from the truth it very often is. And let's have a little chat about TalkTalk. Now, TalkTalk is a major British telco. They got hacked in 2015. It was a very serious incident. They said it cost them £77 million. So by anyone's measure, that is a lot of money. Now, when this incident happened, it, of course, was in the press. And there was a statement from a detective. And I kid you not, what you're about to see, I have not made up. You will be able to take this phrase, plug it into Google, and you will find the news story. This detective said, "We think we know who it might be. We think it's Russian Islamic cyber jihadis." I was just looking at this going, what? Like, where do you get any of these words from except for maybe cyber? Like, why have you drawn this conclusion? And the only assertion I can make about this is that they were trying to combine words which they thought would make people feel scared. That's the only thing I can think of, because it is a great headline, isn't it? Russian Islamic cyber jihadis. Now, in reality, it was actually this guy. And it is difficult to tell whether he's wearing a hoodie or not in this shot because his face is obfuscated. Now, why is his face obfuscated? Well, because it's a child. It's a 17-year-old kid who's managed to do tens of millions of pounds of damage to a major telco. How is this possible? How do we have this massive leverage where we can take someone who is a child with very little experience and sophistication and leverage that little ability they have to do £77 million worth of damage to an organisation like TalkTalk? Now, they do take these things seriously. In the UK, they took his iPhone away, which actually is probably about the most serious thing that can happen to a 17-year-old child. That would basically feel like the end of their life. Got probation for a year as well. No more hacking stuff for a year. Couldn't do it. Plus, he didn't have his iPhone anyway. But compare. She's always listening. We're worried about all the cyber things and all the things that might be listening. And here I've got this little supercomputer on my wrist, which is listening to everything I say and then interjecting. But IoT is awesome, really. So isn't it interesting, though, how we have this perception and this image of InfoSec, and it's all green screens and hoodies and things like this. And then we have the reality, which is a child. Now, time and time again, we're seeing InfoSec incidents happen because the fruit is so low-hanging. Now, I'll give you an example of what I mean by this. Australian Red Cross Blood Service, this was 2016. And someone reached out to me and they said, "Hey, I've got donateblood.com.au database, and it contains information about 1.3 million Australians. This is what the data looks like." Now, this is a typical set of columns that would be in a data breach. First name, last name, gender, this sort of thing. And for the most part, all of this is very usual until you get down to blood type. And blood type is not something that you normally see in a data breach. And I was curious about this because not only do we not see it, but I'm not sure if it's a problem or not. And the reason I'm not sure it's a problem is because on the one hand, it's like, okay, this is health data, and health data is a very particular kind of data. It is more sensitive than, let's say, someone's email address, their phone number. But on the other hand, what do you do with it? Like if someone gets my blood type, it's not like they're going to ransom me over it. It's like, hey, I see you're AB positive. Yeah, give us Bitcoin. It's like, no, that's not going to happen. But it does feel uncomfortable. He didn't know if it contained passwords, or rather he said it didn't. He didn't know if I wanted it, which doesn't bother me because I don't care if there's passwords or not. I just want to be able to answer the question, have I been pwned? And I wanted to take this seriously because, as you can see, he's got a hoodie. So he's obviously a hacker. The guy's probably got something quite valuable. So I said, yeah, look, I'd be interested in this. I've donated blood before. I might be in there myself. And he's like, yep, you are. Here's your data. And I wasn't happy with that. These are honest, candid discussions that I've had with hackers. And this is generally my reaction when I find myself in a new data breach. Have I been pwned 25 times now? But what was interesting here is the guy said he was just scanning IPs, and that's how he found it, and he wasn't doing this for bad purposes. And what he ultimately located was a file like this. So all he did is he went to an IP address and he knocked on the door, port 80. He said, hey, is there a directory listing here? Yeah, there's a directory listing. Are there any .SQL files? Yeah, there's a .SQL file. Here you go. And this is how he found the data. And so often the data breaches which end up in have I been pwned have literally just come from organizations backing up their databases to publicly accessible locations. Now, something else is really fascinating about this. Now, I want to touch for a moment on how I gave my data to the Red Cross, because I hear people often say these days, they're like, you should minimize your data footprint by not entering any information into websites, as though you have some choice. So, I mean, look, okay, you've got a degree of choice, but the idea of just avoiding websites altogether and avoiding handing information over to those sites really doesn't fly. And the situation with Red Cross is that I never entered my data into a website. I went to a blood van, just like this one just here. So the blood van came around to work one day. I remember when this was. I was still in the corporate world. They came on site and the van was there, and I went into the van and they gave me a piece of paper and I filled out the information that you saw on the previous screen. Somebody else digitized this. And I think the important lesson here is that regardless of how hard you might try to avoid handing your data over in digital format, it's kind of all over the place anyway, because we have lives. Like, we go out and we do things, and sometimes those things that we do require us to hand over information. Now, the most sensitive part of that entire data breach was the eligibility criteria. And out of those eligibility criteria, one of the questions was this one. In the last 12 months, have you engaged in at-risk sexual behaviour? Which was a very polite way of asking if you'd slept with a prostitute. This is a perfectly valid question for people donating blood. But imagine having that data leaked. So not only are we leaking large amounts of data, and large amounts of data which we may never have provided in digital format, but we're leaking extremely personal, sensitive data attributes. Now, one of the other things that we're leaking time and time again is passwords. And passwords have become, for many security professionals, the bane of their existence, am I right? Dealing with the problems that come from passwords. Now, passwords began back here in the 60s. At least this is where they began on computer systems. I imagine that we had passwords for millennia beforehand. I'm picturing a Bugs Bunny cartoon and the guard asking what the password is before Bugs is allowed into the cave. But much a lot longer after that, we then had passwords on computer systems, and it began here at MIT in the 60s. And passwords worked in a very simple fashion, and it's exactly the way they still work today. You have two strings in your header, username and a password. Those two strings also exist in the system that you're authenticating to. If the strings in your head match the strings in the system, you are you and you get to log on. But think about the risk factors back here in the 60s. First of all, for someone to log onto your account, they had to get into this room. This entire room of computer, because this was back in the day where it took an entire room to fit a computer. You had to have sophisticated knowledge. I got no idea what I'd do if I ended up in that room. Like, is it tapes? Is it punch cards? Like, which knob do I turn first? Like, I do not know how that thing works, and very, very few people did. So the risks we had with someone misusing a password then are fundamentally different to today, yet they still work in precisely the same way. Fast forward a bit. Let's go forward a couple of decades. We get to the 80s. Now, when we're in the 80s, we're now starting to get personal computers in the home. And not only personal computers in the home, but personal computers that can dial up to central locations like the Prestel. Now, the Prestel went out to about a total of somewhere in the order of 90,000 people. 90,000 people got one of these in their home, and they could now start dialing into a central location and authenticating to a server. There's a little video clip here I'm going to play. This is BBC back in the mid-80s, where this guy shows how to authenticate. Watch very carefully at what he does.
The Prestel computer is now asking me to enter my own personal password, which I've now done.
Did you get that? You see what his password was? Let's zoom and enhance and take a closer look at this. Right, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. The good old trusty sequential numeric password. Why do people do this? Well, they do it because the password is a barrier to entry. It is something which is between them and the thing that they are there to do. He just wants to do whatever it was he used to do with the connected computer in the 80s. And this password is in the way. What's the fastest way I can get it out of the way? I make it something that's easy to remember and easy to type. You could get away with that more in the 60s, back in MIT. It's harder to get away with it in the 80s, where now we've got tens of thousands of people all connected to this remote network. Fast forward another couple of decades into the noughties, and it's harder again, because now we've got internet. We've got millions of websites. We've got billions of people using them. And now we've got a problem. The problem is passwords are too predictable. So what we as an industry did is we said, we're going to come up with password complexity criteria. Now, I have some file footage here of someone trying to create a password on a website in the 2000s. This is Bob. Now, Bob's at his computer, and the website is saying, in order for you to register, Bob, you will need to create a password that's got at least one lowercase character, at least one uppercase character. You've got to have at least one number. You've got to have at least one non-alphanumeric character. It's got to be at least 8 characters long, and it can't be any of the last 5 passwords that you've used before. And Bob is losing his freaking mind because now creating passwords is painful. And we have all been Bob. We have all been here. We have all been to a website that does precisely this. Or one of my pet hates, websites that say your password is too strong, please make it shorter or take out some of the special characters. And then I'm there just going, well, aren't all characters special? Like, why do we have this character discrimination thing? So what do people do? What do people do when they're faced with password complexity criteria? Well, they create passwords which will meet the complexity criteria. Passwords just like this. And this is a good password. Except you're looking at it and going, no, this is not good. But bear with me. Uppercase, lowercase, number, non-alphanumeric. And this is actually 15 characters long too. Like by any reasonable measure, this is a good password. Except you know that it's not a good password because you are seeing patterns and you are seeing something that is predictable. You're seeing English words that you recognize and you're seeing character substitution. But you could almost certainly create this password at your place of work today. And if you did, what would happen in 90 days from now? You would be prompted to change it because a hacker might have gotten your password. So, what do you do in 90 days? Well, you do this. And this is very scalable because you can just keep going and going and going. And the beautiful thing about this is that you can take the number that is on the end of your work password right now, I know you have one, we all do it, and you can divide that by 4, and that's how many years you've been at the company. I got up to 23 in my last company. Now, we're doing this virtual, so I can't see your reaction, but I know how you're reacting because I've done this enough times in person where I've looked at the audience and seen how uneasy everyone gets. And often I'll say to people, I'll go, okay, you go to a website and you're trying to create a password and you're using that same terrible lowercase password you use everywhere else. And the website says, you must have at least one uppercase character. What do you do? And everyone's like looking at the person next to them and eventually someone says, well, you just capitalize the first letter. And everyone laughs nervously because they all know they do it. All right, you got to have at least one number. What do? And then someone else is like, well, you put a 1 at the end. And it's the nervous laughter again. What about the non-alphanumeric character? Exclamation mark at the end, and everyone is still nervous and laughing at each other. And then, of course, you get to the whole bit about password rotation, and they're just like, yeah, you just increment the number. If we all know this, don't you think that hackers also know this? Like, they have worked this out. They're quite clever. So part of the problem is that when we mandate arbitrary password complexity criteria like this, we inevitably find that people follow very predictable patterns, and we also find that people take shortcuts to memorizing the password. And I'll give you a good example of this. This bloke here is running the Hawaiian Emergency Response Center, and if you remember a couple of years ago, a whole bunch of people in Hawaii suddenly got alerts to their mobile devices saying there were missiles coming. And it was very stressful, understandably, for people there. And it was a false alarm, and then the news went in and they interviewed this guy, and they're like, okay, you know, what happened? And he explained it, and there's this photo of him here standing in front of his sock here with all these monitors and screens and things, and there's something very alarming down here on one of these screens. They're still running Internet Explorer. Oh, and he'd also pasted his password on a post-it note just beneath that. And this again demonstrates the problem where people will take shortcuts to circumvent the security controls. So as an industry, we're now starting to say, well, maybe we need to recognize that humans are not just like little automated random number generators that have password managers in their head that can create strong, unique passwords and remember them all. Humans don't really work that way. So let's recognize that some of the things we're doing don't work so well. So an example of this, NIST has said what we really should do, instead of this arbitrary complexity criteria, is we should make sure that verifiers do not impose composition rules for memorized secrets. So stop this stuff about uppercase and lowercase. People will do things that are very predictable. The NCSC in the UK has said, look, on the whole rotation thing, you really should only ask users to change their password on indication of suspicion of compromise. Now, these are the headlines, right? There's a bunch of other stuff that they say we should also do, which we couldn't really do as well before. Ubiquitous transport layer encryption, perfect example. User behavioral analytics, perfect example. Bob normally goes into the office and he logs onto the marketing department and he gets in there at 9, he leaves at 5. One day, Bob logs in from Beijing and pulls down 5 terabytes of data. Maybe it's not Bob. That is much more intelligent than telling Bob he should have an uppercase letter somewhere in his password. Now, as we sort of delve into the other problems with passwords, and there are more problems than what we have time for, one of the problems is they keep popping up all over the place in locations such as this. Collection number 1. Now, about 2 years ago, in fact, I remember where it was. It was January 2019. This collection of nearly 2.7 billion email address and password pairs popped up online. And if we have a look at what is in this collection, it looks like this. Now imagine instead of 37 rows, there's just 2.7 billion rows. And this is a credential stuffing list, sometimes referred to as a combo list. Email address, password pairs. Doesn't matter where they're from. All that matters is that they worked somewhere. And by virtue of the fact that people will reuse their passwords, many of these combos here will work in other locations. Now, this data was circulating quite extensively, and people would ask me, they'd say, did you get it from the dark web? It's always scary. Was it from the dark web? And I'd say, no, it's much worse than that. It's much, much scarier than the dark web. It's Twitter. It's the clear web. And the reason I say it's much scarier is that as easily accessible as Tor hidden services are, I am much more worried about the fact that data proliferates so extensively in the clear because anyone could go and download those files and have billions of credential pairs owned by innocent victims who would then go on and use them in other locations. Part of the challenge here is that we do have to educate the people. We have to educate the people not to reuse their password, and initiatives such as NIST and the NCSCs will help us move in a direction where we're not doing silly things with passwords. But the industry as a whole is also making it very difficult for people to make good security decisions. And I'm going to give you an example of that. I got this email a little while ago. Now, when I got this email and I looked at it, I went, all right, this is a bank and they are asking me to download something and run it. This looks fishy. So far, just on what I see here, has all the hallmarks of a fishy email. But I'm going to do something which is very advanced. And this is going to give me a better idea as to whether it's legitimate or not. I'm going to tap and hold on that App Store button on my iPhone. I'm not going to tap it too quickly, otherwise it will follow the link. Tap and hold, and here's what I see. And if I expand this out, this is what the link looks like. Now, does this look like ANZ Bank? No, not really. Is it served over HTTPS? Well, first of all, that alone is not really an indicator that you can trust the site. It's just an indicator that we're going to have a TLS connection. But second of all, no, it's not. And everything about this was looking super fishy. But I'm a security guy and I'm curious and I've done this a few times before. YOLO, let's just follow the link and it goes here. c00.adobe.com. It's like, is this ANZ? Is this legitimate? Everything about this reeks of a fish. So I got in touch with some people at ANZ and said, hey, look, I'm getting phishing attacks that look like they're trying to come from ANZ. No, they're real. Like real phishing attacks? No, like real emails. This is legitimate communication from ANZ to customers. And I happened to spend a bit of time with ANZ at a later date, and I showed this in a presentation, and there's just all these security people at the front going, oh, crap, it's marketing again. It's always marketing. It's always marketing's fault. But the problem is, and I see this over and over and over again, I had the same thing with the tax office only a few weeks ago, legitimate organisations sending legitimate communications are indistinguishable from phishing attacks. Now, of course, phishing attacks are designed to be indistinguishable from legitimate communications. They will emulate that. But then we try and tell people not to click on suspicious links. You know, don't be phished and socially engineered into downloading and running things. And then we do stuff like this. So we as an industry have to do a lot better not to look exactly like a phishing attack. The difficulty here is, how can consumers, individual, normal, everyday mums and dads and normal people, make decisions about security posture when we have things like this? Now, extending that logic, particularly the mums and dads logic, how do they make good security decisions about products like this one? There's a kids tracking watch. Now, the value proposition of a kids tracking watch is it appeals to what's referred to as a helicopter parent. And a helicopter parent is someone who hovers around the kids. They want to know, where are the kids? Are the kids okay? Are the kids in danger? Have the kids been kidnapped or not? So what you do is you get this watch and you put this watch on the kid's wrist. And this watch has a 3G SIM card. It's got a GPS built into it. It's also got a speaker and a microphone. We'll come back to that. And then you can track where the kid goes. And in fact, I've still got this watch on my desk in my office right here. And I keep it as a little reminder of just how messed up stuff gets. But we'll get back to that in just a moment. So here's the watch. Now, this watch is made by an Australian company called TikTok Track. And as you can see here, it's the watch that watches out for them. Little clever play on words there. Now, a mate of mine in the UK, a guy called Ken Munro, he runs a penetration testing company called Pentest Partners. And Pentest Partners had found lots of interesting vulnerabilities with kids tracking watches in the past. And he saw this one pop up on the market and he got in touch with me and he said, hey, look, this is in Australia. You're in Australia. You should get one of these and we'll have a look at it and we'll see how it goes. So I thought, all right, this will be interesting. I went to the website, the TikTok Track website, and I had a read of it, and I saw the big padlock, so I knew it would be okay. This is basically like the hoodie of hackers. Like this is just imagery which means absolutely nothing. TikTok Track software is custom built and securely hosted in Brisbane, Queensland. Now, this is only just up the road from me. It's about an hour drive away. And I'm a very proud Australian, very proud Queenslander, and we have many wonderful things here. But when I think of Queensland, I'm not thinking of data security. Like, this is not the first thing that comes to mind. It's like beaches and the Great Barrier Reef. Like, that's what comes to mind. So why do we have this? Well, again, we sort of come back to this theme of how is security represented? What's the image people are trying to create? Well, they're trying to say, look, this is hosted near us. It's on Aussie soil. It'll be fine. And then I saw the second line. We take the security of your data seriously. And the reason I laugh at that is how pretty much every single breach disclosure notice I've ever seen begins. It's like, hi, Troy, just writing to let you know, we take the security of your data seriously. By the way, we had a data security incident where we didn't take it seriously enough, and now your data is on the dark web, or even worse, on Twitter. So I lament that this term was used here. And as I'm reading this, I'm going, just none of this looks good. None of this looks good. Or you would have to be crazy to get one of these watches and put it on your kid. So anyway, I got one of these watches and I put it on my kid. This is research. This is Elle, and she was 6 years old at the time. So this was about 2 years ago now. And that watch is this exact watch I have in my hand now. Now, as you can see on the screen grab here, the watch actually says Gator. It doesn't say TikTok Track. And the reason why is that this is made by a Chinese company running out of Shenzhen. And there is certainly nothing wrong with the Chinese-made watch. I have one on my wrist here. It just has an Apple logo instead of a Gator logo. But I raise it because it's interesting that the watch is made by another company, and then you get TikTok Track, and they get the watch, and then they build all the ecosystem around it. They build the APIs, and they build the front end to it, the mobile app, which you'll see in just a moment. So we get this watch, and we start taking a look at it. And it's very easy to identify the APIs that sit behind the watch and also behind the companion app that runs on your phone. So Ken starts poking away and he finds an API like this. It's an API to get yourself a family. And what it does is it calls a path which passes a parameter, family identifier equals, and then it passes this number. Now, because Ken's a smart guy and he can count, he can hack. So he literally just changed the number. He changed this number, 3497, to another number, and he got another family. That's it. It was that simple. Now, this is alarming in many ways. One of the ways, actually, it was alarming is it's not like there was no authentication whatsoever. You did have to be authenticated. There was a token passed in a request header. But the authentication went like this. Are you logged in? Yep, cool. Get whatever family you want. So there was never an access control on the family itself. Another interesting thing that happened, it's a little bit tangential to the security issue itself, but after all of this happened and they took it all offline and then it went into the press, the CEO was questioned by journalists, and a journalist said to the CEO, journalists always ask this, they're like, how many Aussie families have been impacted by this? And she said, look, that's, the sales volumes are commercial in confidence. That's not something we want to share. And I'm looking at the API going, I reckon I know how many Aussie families have been impacted by this. Is it roughly 3,500? So yeah, don't put commercial secrets in your API calls either. Now, this, of course, is just an OData query, and this is a filter. Many months later, in fact, at the beginning of 2020, someone found a regression bug after they had fixed this. And they found that if you remove the filter, it does exactly what you think removing a filter does. It actually returned all the data. In fact, he returned all the data. He took a backup and sent it to me. So unfortunately, this is one of those ones that did come back to bite them again. But let's delve down further into this API. When you called that API, you got a family, a JSON response with my personal data. And of course, if you -1 in this case, because I registered quite close to the point at which they took the service down, and you counted backwards by, let's say, 3,500, you would get another family and you'd get all this personal data. There are also APIs to do things like getting a child with a post request. Now, for the technical people out there and for those who are more of the Rastafarian kind of mindset about what verbs are restful or not, or what is a proper restful implementation of a verb, why we are getting something with a post which is meant to change state is a bit beyond me, and it's kind of tangential to the security issue, but it just bugs me every time I see it. So anyway, you get a child with a post, you pass a family ID, same problem. Relocate a child, same problem. Every one of the APIs had the same problem. Post is probably a bit more appropriate here than a get. Maybe it should be a put. I don't know. REST people, let me know. Regardless, same issue here. No matter what verb was used, we could still relocate a child or get a child's location just by passing an enumerable number. So we wanted to demonstrate this problem. We put the watch on Elle, sent her to tennis camp. It was the holidays when we did this. So send Elle off to tennis camp. I open up the app and I can see that she is at the tennis club. And I, as a helicopter parent, know that she has not been kidnapped. And then Ken, because he has access to the API and because he can count, dumps her in the ocean. So now it's like I'm looking at my app and going, all right, so my daughter's out there off Wavebreak Island, far enough out, like she can swim a little bit, but can she get to the island? I don't know. And all of this was because of an insecure direct object reference vulnerability in the API. And IDOR, it's like the oldest trick in the book. But it was worse than that. This watch also works as a phone. This is why it has a speaker and a microphone in it. But it would be weird if just any old person could call your child and start having a conversation with them. So you have to specify what is the phone number of a parent. Now, there's a handy API that you can do this with. And by about now, you can think you can see where this discussion is going. So we wanted to demonstrate it. We sat Elle up in bed, and Ken got one of his colleagues, a guy called Vangelis, to set himself as the parent. And then Vangelis calls Elle. Now, watch what happens in this video, and particularly watch what Elle has to do in order to take the call. And like 2 years on watching that, it still feels freaky. It's super freaky. Now, did you notice what she did to answer the call? Nothing. Zero interaction. It's one of the reasons these got banned in Germany, because they said, look, it's just a surreptitious listening device. You can have that device somewhere, anywhere, and remotely trigger it to start listening, which is super, super, super concerning. And again, IDOR, oldest trick in the book. Now, we disclosed this responsibly, and it wasn't the worst disclosure I've been involved in, but it was a long way from the best as well. And it took quite a bit of effort to try and explain that Ken and I were good guys. We weren't out there to screw the company over or anything like that. And we made sure that disclosure happened and the service was offline before anything went public. Like, we did all the normal good stuff that you do. But disclosure remains a really challenging issue in this industry. Doing it in a responsible fashion, which drives us towards a better security posture. This is the problem that we keep having. And I want to leave you with just an absolutely beautiful example of this, and it relates to this padlock. Now, this is a biometric padlock, and there's a guy with a YouTube channel called The Lockpicking Lawyer. Massively popular channel. He goes and physically penetration tests all of these different padlocks. Extremely entertaining. Usually takes him about 30 seconds to get through just about any lock. So anyway, he's looking at this lock, and he finds there's a screw on the side of the lock. And the screw does exactly what you're thinking the screw does. Like, he takes out his screwdriver, he undoes the screw, lock comes apart. That's not the good bit. It's a good bit. But here's the kicker. Because he's a responsible guy, he sends a message to the company and he says, look, I got your lock. I undid the screw with my screwdriver and the thing came apart. I really think you got a problem. And the company responded in a way which just perfectly illustrates the problem that I and many others have day in and day out in the InfoSec industry. And they said, the lock is invincible to people who do not have a screwdriver. And this again just perfectly illustrates the lack of understanding and responsible action taken by organizations building vulnerable things. So with that, that is the end of my talk. Thank you very much for joining in. And I believe that we are now going to go to some Q&A.